If you are a Black African American person with consciousness, common sense, and historical vision, you will always question the ride of the slave ship. Seek out the ancestors and learn their story. As an African, you must know, how did you arrive in the Americas, all the way from across the deep waters of the Atlantic Ocean, from the warm, tropical countries and homes in West Africa and the motherland? We are the offsprings and descendants of those people who got on the slave ships to the New World. They had to be the strongest, bravest, and the most heroic people ever to have survived the monumental evil of man's inhumanity to man, and one of the epic events in history's earth-changing event, crimes against humanity. How can we figure out fact from fiction? Events happening hundreds of years ago in this epic history and story of 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade, 1400 to 1800. Starting around the 1400 and ending in the latter part of the 1800s. One thing is for certain: the greatest depopulation of Black humans from West Africa took place. And it is ranked as one of the most monumental historical events in the annals of human beings on this planet. It is the story of human history. Western civilization, European colonial powers, with then state-of-the-art technology and firearms, and up until that time, the single most advanced ships, the 3 mast sail ships. These ships, harnessing the winds with mast-billowing man-made cloth canvas sails, rode the winds, sailing into the uncharted and charted oceans of the deep Atlantic. With the blessings of the European powers, and let us not forget, and in the name of Christianity, the slave ships sailed. Slavery has occurred in many forms throughout the world, but the Atlantic slave trade, which forcefully brought more than 12 million Africans to the Americas, stand out for both its global scale and its lasting legacy. The personal impact of this massive historical injustice basically is intertwined with all conscious people now living in this time and space. This human misery, generated by the forced movement of millions of people in the slave ships, cannot have been matched by any other human activity. For 4 centuries, from the mid-15th century to 1888, Europeans were not prepared to enslave each other, but were prepared to buy Africans and keep them and their descendants enslaved. The notorious cross-Atlantic journey, where hundreds of slaves were confined in chains, ironed, below deck, in crowded, hot, unsanitary, and inhumane conditions. Most slaves were kept below deck, naked and only partially clothed, shackled and ironed, right leg to left leg. Nevertheless, slaves sometimes broke free of their chains and attacked the crew. More than 450 slave insurrections have been documented. Uprisings were extremely violent, brutal, and sometimes many slaves and most crew members were killed. This legacy of African enslavement is the adventure of all humankind. It is lost found in historical pages of today's knowledge. No other story in man's history is more poignant than our story, the blackest vision of reality. This is more than operatic drama, tragedy, death, and life. However, this is it. It is more than opera because it is a clear story singing life, and life is all we have as human beings. And life is tragedy, happiness, agony, joy, suffering, glory, sharp, goodness, sin, families, retributions, and sadly, also love. The ride of the slave ship was stormy. Storms at sea, the wind, rain, darkness, and the howling sea itself was a very frightening ordeal that our African people faced during these challenging issues and had to deal with and overcome. Violence beget violence, and the slave ship ride was always stormy in its nature, and also more in nature in the reality of enslaved Africans riding ships to another world in chains and bondage. Operatic drama played out daily on the long ocean voyage, agony, despair, disease, and always the feeling of uprising, insurrection, death and destruction on the high sea. This is unknown opera, and it must be exposed for its inhumane uniqueness in the human story. During the 400-year transatlantic slave history, it has been said that this particular event, this evil darkness, was indeed a storm that followed the path of the meteorological hurricanes today. In other words, the slave ship path is where the hurricanes come from. That evenness has been etched and transferred as a symbol of what once happened in these stormy waters of the Atlantic Ocean. It is a curse, and it reminds and recalls the past of that scorched, wet earth event that happened and changed world history forever. A one-way ticket and a ship ride of a lifetime, and a one-way ticket to a white hell. It is written somewhere, history is the cause of certain circumstances, written down, right or wrong. History is alive. It breathes in human beings as a continuing story. Never forget, the blackest Holocaust in the history of all recorded knowledge of humankind here on earth. Remember, the spirit of the ancestors is in us. Nothing has never been done of this magnitude and significance in the annals of human history. This one-time event is now indelibly etched and hardwired into the being and DNA of the African now living in the Americas. This history of slavery, the centuries, the peculiar institution, and the biblical ethos stamp on a people's psyche, giving Africans a stronger immune system. The Church of England, the Pope, and the Catholic Church, the European countries, and all, in the name of Christianity, approved this business of slavery, and the slave ships sailed on. The slave ship story is one of the all-time greatest unwritten operas of all time. It is a conflict of slavery and being a human being. Nowhere in the annals of history has a people experienced such a long and traumatic ordeal as Africans during the Atlantic slave trade. Over the nearly 4 centuries of the slave trade, which continued until the end of the Civil War, millions of African men, women, and children were savagely torn from their homeland, herded onto ships, and dispersed all over the so-called New World. These are the words from historian Dr. John Andre Clark. After the storms and mutinies and other ocean crossing events, calm, smooth sailing seas hearkened. The sailors, the outlook, and watchmen cried out, "Land oh! Land oh! Ship ahoy! Ship ahoy!" Ports of call and horizon beckoned the African removed from his land to another time and space. As the journey ended, yet another journey began anew. The African, the planet's original people and man, starts a new history, irregardless of sacrifices and immolations of the gods. It is no wonder that he alone has always been the mark of history on this planet. Out of his blackness one see light. The ancestors speak loudly, saying and teaching the past lesson of a monumental history steeped in heroic actions and daunting realities of almost impossible stories of survival. The strongest people on this planet sold into slavery, but still rising to declare to us, the offsprings, what we must accomplish as of their ultimate sacrifices to the New World and the Americas. On their labor, we, the children of the heroic ancestors, receive the blessing in this operatic history and humanity of a people, a black people, who rode the slave ship.